I want to tell you about a man I used to watch from across the hall and think, how does he see things the rest of us don't? I worked at JPMorgan as a banker. I worked under Jamie Dimon. I was not in his inner circle. I was not sitting at the table where the biggest decisions were made, but I was close enough to observe how the culture of that institution thought, moved, and made decisions. And let me tell you something, the way that organization thought about risk, about preparation, about the difference between what looks good and what is good. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. And it shaped how I think about money, leadership, and decision making to this day. Jamie Dimon just put out his 2026 letter to JP Morgan shareholders. It runs tens of pages. It is one of the most widely read documents in global finance. And while every other bank CEO was celebrating a record breaking quarter, JP Morgan made $16.5 billion dollars in profit in just the first 3 months of 2026. Diamond used that letter to warn the world about what he called an increasingly complex set of risks. Te- Tectonic shifts, Iran, inflation, a possible credit recession, hope for the best and plan for the worst is how he put it. The world's most profitable banker is warning you while everyone else is celebrating. That's the diamond paradox. And understanding how he thinks, that actual mental process, the framework, the habits, is one of the most valuable things I can teach you because those same thinking habits work in your financial life, your career, and your leadership. Not because you're running a bank, because thinking like Diamond is just thinking clearly under pressure. And that's what this whole show is about today. I'm Mike Aponte, also known as M.A. Aponte. I'm an author, consultant, executive director of a charter school, former bank and wealth manager at JP Morgan Merrill Lynch, and this is Thinking to Think. For anyone who doesn't know who Jamie Dimon is, he's the CEO and chairman of JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States and one of the most powerful financial institutions on the planet. He's led the company since 2005, over 20 years. During the 2008 financial crisis, when every other major bank was either collapsing or getting bailed out by the government, JP Morgan not only survived, it made strategic acquisitions of failing banks while others were drowning. That's not luck. That's a thinking system that worked when everyone else failed. His annual shareholder letter is so comprehensive, so candid, and so intellectually rigorous that people outside finance, in government, academia, leadership read it as a guide to how to think around the world. A 65-page letter, not a press release, not a bullet points, a serious detailed analysis of economics, geopolitics, leadership, and risk. That's who we're studying today. And here's what I saw working. When I was at JP Morgan, what struck me most wasn't the size of the numbers, it was the culture of thinking. Everything was documented, everything was questioned. There was a phrase that ran through the whole organization that I later learned came directly from Diamond himself. Facts, analysis, detail. Facts, analysis, detail, repeat. You never do enough and it does not end. That phrase changed how I think about preparation, not as something you finish, but as something you do continuously. You don't prepare and then stop. You prepare, then prepare some more, then update your preparation. When new information comes in, that's not anxiety. That's professional rigor. And Diamond built a $3 trillion organization on it. Here's what also I observe, what research confirms, and what is his own words reveal about Jamie Dimon actually thinks. Habit one, he thinks in scenarios, not predictions. Most people and most financial commentators try to predict what will happen. Diamond some, does something a little different. He maps out a wide range of what could happen and prepares for all of it. He's publicly said that even with thousands of market analysis on his payroll, he knows they can't predict the future. So instead of predicting, he stress tests. Think about what that means. Instead of saying, I think the market will go up 8% this year, he says, here are 15 different things that could happen. Here's how bad each one could be. And here's what we do in each scenario. He doesn't bet on one outcome, he prepares for many. Researchers call this scenario planning, but in plain English, it's exactly what I was trained to do as an Army officer and as an NYPD cop. Never go into a situation assuming you know how it ends. Walk in ready for what you don't expect. Right now, he's warning about inflation slowly creeping back up, geopolitical tension from Iran conflict, trade uncertainty, and what he calls a possible credit recession, a period when lending dries up and it gets very hard to borrow money. Could be wrong about the timing, but he's not trying to be right about timing. He's trying to make sure JP Morgan is ready no matter what comes. Habit two, he uses the OODA loop. Now, Diamond's decisions making process borrows from the military, actually. It's something I learned from the military, specifically from the framework created by a fighter pilot named John Boyd. Boyd studied how the best pilots made decisions in dogfights and created what he called the OODA loop. OODA loop is OODA: observe, orient, decide, act. It's a cycle, not a one time thing. You look at a situation, you understand your position in it, you make a decision, you act, and then you start over, observing again to see how the situation changed because of what you did. Diamond applies this to banking. He's consistently looking at new data, reorienting his understanding of what the data means, making decisions, acting, and then he's checking how reality responds. He doesn't make a decision uh, and coast on it. He keeps cycling and he moves fast through the loop compared to his competitors, which is how JP Morgan was able to acquire two failing banks in 2008, Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual, while everyone else was still figuring out what was happening. Here's what this means for you. Most people make decisions and then defend them even when reality tells them the decisions was wrong. They stepped off the OODA loop. Diamond never steps off. He stays curious, stays updated, stays willing to change course. It can be hard to change your attitudes, he's written, but you must be open to it. When you learn something new, it may affect many conclusions you've held, not just one. Habit three, he thinks on Sundays. Here's one I love because it's so simple and so powerful. Diamond sets aside Sunday morning specifically for thinking through hard problems. No meetings, no calls, no interruptions, just him and the most difficult questions he's been carrying. He said that progress doesn't always mean reaching a final conclusion. Sometimes it's just a rational next step. And he creates a space for that kind of slow, deliberate progress every single week. Sound familiar? That's the 24-hour rule in action. That slow is smooth, smooth is fast, built into a weekly calendar. The most powerful banker in the world schedules time to not rush his most important thinking. And I've discussed that in greater detail in a previous episode on the 24-hour rule. When was the last time you scheduled time to think? Not to work, not to respond to emails, not to be productive, just to think. How, just to think how hard the questions in your life. Diamond does it every week. That's not a coincidence. And if you have ever had that experience where you took the time to do that, put it in the comments below. I'm very curious. Habit four, he seeks out people who disagree with him. One of Diamond's most counterintuitive practices, he's actively seeks out dissenting opinions. His 2026 leadership framework specifically includes what he calls cognitive diversity, deliberately putting people around him who sees things differently and will push back. Not yes men. people who will tell him he's wrong. He's written that butting heads can actually lead to breakthroughs and warns leaders that becoming rigid is dangerous because people will weaponize that rigidity against you. In other words, if everyone knows you won't change your mind, they'll stop giving you honest information. And a leader without honest information is flying blind. This is the steel man practice from episode 2 of the Thinking Through Crisis series in action at the highest level of global finance. Diamond doesn't just tolerate disagreement, he builds his organization around it because he knows that the only way to catch your own blind spots is to have people who aren't afraid to point them out. Habit 5, he separates optimism from preparation. This is perhaps the most important mental habit Diamond has, and it's one of the most pe- people get backwards. Most people think you're either an optimist or a pessimist. Diamond rejects that completely. Says the right stance is be genuinely optimistic about long term and be rigorously prepared for short term disaster. Hope for the best and plan for the worst, not for one or the other, both at the same time. His fortress balance sheet philosophy, the idea that JP Morgan always maintained more capital reserve than it technically needs, comes from this. When the 2008 crisis hit, banks that had operated lean to maximize short term profits collapsed. JP Morgan had the reserves to survive and to acquire. They were rewarded for preparation that looked unnecessary right up until it was life saving. Here's how this applies to you. How much financial cushion do you have right now? Not because a crisis is definitely coming, but because if one does, the person with reserves has the option, and the person without reserves has panic. Diamond has said no one can predict what happens next, but you can decide in advance how ready you'll be when something unpredictable happens. Now, what Diamond gets right that most people get wrong, and here's the short term trap. The most common money mistake I saw as a banker, both at JP Morgan and as a wealth manager at Merrill Lynch, was optimizing for the short term at the expense of the long term, taking on more risk than you can handle because the market's been good lately, spending the cushion because everything feels stable, dismissing warning signs because nothing bad has happened yet. Diamond has spent 20 years refusing to fall into that trap. He's famously quoted saying, "We're not here to hit the quarter. We're here to build a business that lasts decades." That's a long term thinking and is directly at odds with how most people manage their money, their careers, and their organizations. And here's what the warning nobody wants to hear. Right now, Diamond is issuing warnings that most of the financial media is soft pedaling because record profits feels good. Let me give you his actual words from the 2026 letter. His warning that the world faces tectonic shifts, fundamental changes to the global order that are unlike anything since World War II. He's worried about inflation that could slowly go up instead of slowly going down. He's warning about a credit recession. He's pointing to the Iran conflict as a potential oil shock trigger. Now, again, it's not future predictors. And of this recording, there's another peace deal arrangement. How long that's going to last, who knows? But it's all about preparing for the worst. He's not saying disaster is certain. He's saying it's possible in a way that most people aren't preparing for. And his track record of reading these environments is better than almost anyone alive. He's not an alarmist. He's the guy who was right in 2008 while his competitors were confident right up to the time they weren't. So, what should you do with that information? You're not running a bank, obviously, but the principles are the same. Don't optimize so hard for today. that you leave yourself exposed if tomorrow is hard. Keep the cushion, diversify, and don't let record numbers in your portfolio or your career or your organization make you feel safer than you actually are. The diamond framework for your life. Let me translate everything we've covered into 5 specific habits you can use starting this week. Not Wall Street habits, life habits. 1, think in scenarios, not predictions. This week, pick one big decision you're facing. Instead of trying to predict what will happen, map out 3 scenarios: best case, worst case, and most likely. Then ask, am I ready for all 3? Stay on the OODA loop. When you make a decision and a reality responds, check in. It's what you assumed still true. If new information comes in that should change your conclusion, change it. Don't defend a decision that the facts are telling you was wrong. 3, schedule Sunday thinking. Block 30 to 60 minutes this Sunday for the hard questions. And if Sunday doesn't work for you, pick a Saturday. Just a question you've been avoiding, not to solve it, just to think through it deliberately without interruption. Progress doesn't require a final answer, it requires honest engagement. 4, find your disagreeers. Identify one person in your life who regularly sees things differently than you and whose judgment you respect. Make a point of consulting them before your next big decision. Their pushback is the most valuable thing they can give you. I promoted one of my employees because he's a disagreeer. He respectfully disagrees on multiple things and he sees things differently. Lastly, build the fortress. Whatever your equivalent of a balance sheet is, your emergency fund, your skill set, your relationships, your health, invest in it before you need it. The moment you need it, it is too late to build it. Now, here's what we covered today: the 5 thinking habits of Jamie Dimon, scenario planning instead of prediction, staying on the OODA loop of continuous observation and adjustment, protecting Sunday mornings for deep thinking, building cognitive diversity by seeking out people who disagree, and separating optimism from preparation. Hoping for the best while planning for the worst. All of it connected by a core philosophy that runs through everything he does: facts, analysis, detail, repeat. Never rush what doesn't have to be rushed. These aren't Wall Street habits, they're thinking habits. They work on Wall Street because they work everywhere. If this episode gave you something useful, do one thing: follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on. That single action is the most powerful thing you can do to keep these conversations coming. Not a review, just a follow. It takes 3 seconds. Head to maaponte.substack.com for a free How They Think worksheet, a template for analyzing any leader's thinking system and applying it to your own decisions. The link is in the show notes. Consulting services also available if you want to apply these frameworks to your organization directly or to you professionally directly. Think clearly, lead boldly, stay logical. I'm Mike Aponte, and this is Thinking to Think. Have a wonderful day.